The winter of 2025 brought an unforgiving cold to the Montana wilderness, a cold so severe that even the oldest residents had never witnessed anything like it before. Snow fell in thick, heavy curtains, transforming the familiar forest into a strange white desert. Deep within these woods, a mother black bear and her two young cubs faced a crisis that would test their very survival. Their troubles began when the heavy snow caused their den to collapse. The mother bear had carefully chosen this den the previous autumn, tucking her family into what seemed like a secure cave beneath the roots of an ancient pine tree. However, the weight of 3 feet of snow proved too much for the aging tree. The creaking and splitting of roots gave only moments of warning before their shelter crumbled around them. The mother bear's instincts screamed at her to keep her cubs warm and safe. Under normal circumstances, they would have slept through these bitter months, their bodies conserving energy until spring brought its promise of fresh food and warmer days. Now they faced the full fury of a Montana winter, with temperatures plummeting far below zero. The cubs struggled to follow their mother through snow that reached past their heads. Their small bodies, meant to be curled up safe and warm, shivered constantly against the biting wind. The mother bear forged a path ahead of them, her massive body creating tunnels through the deepest drifts. But even her strength began to wane as the hours passed. Every few minutes, she turned to check on her cubs. Their usual playful spirit had vanished, replaced by a quiet determination to keep moving. The smaller of the two cubs, with a distinctive white patch on his chest, worried her the most. His steps grew increasingly unsteady, and his nose had long since stopped twitching at new scents. The other cub, slightly larger and darker, pressed against her sibling, sharing what little warmth she could. As the short winter day began to fade, the mother bear's desperation grew. The temperature dropped even further, and ice crystals formed on her thick fur. She knew her cubs couldn't survive much longer in these conditions. Their bodies, awakened too early from hibernation, burned precious energy with every step. They needed shelter, and they needed it soon. A change in the wind brought unfamiliar scents to her sensitive nose. The smell of smoke from chimneys, the lingering traces of human food, and the unmistakable presence of human dwellings. Every instinct embedded in her DNA through countless generations told her to turn away, to protect her cubs by keeping them far from humans. But the wind carried something else too, a promise of warmth and safety. The mother bear stood still for a long moment, her cubs huddling against her legs. Ahead lay danger, the unknown territory of humans. Behind them stretched the familiar forest, but she knew it offered no shelter in this storm. The choice was made for her when the smaller cub let out a weak whimper, his tiny body trembling violently. Moving cautiously now, she led her cubs toward the sense of civilization. The forest began to thin, revealing glimpses of houses through the trees. The mother bear's muscles tensed with each step into this foreign territory, her ears constantly swiveling to catch any sound of danger. But the storm had driven humans indoors, leaving the snowy landscape eerily quiet. At the edge of the forest, she found what seemed like a promising location. A house stood somewhat apart from its neighbors, with tall trees screening it from the other buildings. The yard was large and enclosed by a wooden fence that creaked in the wind. Most importantly, she spotted a detached garage at the far end of the property, its door not quite closed. The gap was small, but it might be enough. Sarah Mitchell stood at her kitchen window, warming her hands on a mug of herbal tea. At 63 years old, she had lived in this Montana house for over 3 decades, watching the surrounding wilderness through every season. The home had been her sanctuary since her husband Tom passed away 5 years ago, and she found peace in the quiet life she built here. This winter, however, tested even her experienced preparation. The morning news had announced that temperatures would drop to record lows tonight, possibly reaching 40 degrees below zero. Sarah had spent the day checking her generator, storing extra firewood in the mudroom, and making sure her pipes wouldn't freeze. The weathered walls of her home creaked against the growing storm. Living alone at the edge of wilderness required careful attention to detail. Sarah kept her bird feeders full during winter, but always brought them in at night to avoid attracting bears. She maintained her property with respect for the wild creatures that lived in the surrounding forest. The local wildlife had become her quiet companions over the years, though she always kept a sensible distance. A sudden movement caught her eye through the swirling snow. Sarah leaned closer to the window, squinting into the darkness. The security light she had installed last summer flickered on, illuminating her backyard in harsh white light. Her heart jumped into her throat at what she saw. A massive black bear stood in her yard, snow crusted on its dark fur. But what made Sarah's breath catch was the sight of two small cubs huddled against their mother's legs. The bears moved slowly, clearly exhausted. The mother bear's head swayed from side to side, scanning for danger, while her cubs stumbled through the deep snow behind her. Sarah had encountered bears before, but never in winter and never in such obvious distress. Her first instinct was to call the local wildlife services, but she knew they wouldn't be able to reach her house in this storm. The roads had been closed hours ago, deemed too dangerous for travel. Keeping perfectly still, Sarah watched as the bear family made their way across her yard. The smaller cub caught her attention particularly. It moved unsteadily, barely able to lift its feet out of the snow. Even from this distance, she could see it shivering violently. The mother bear periodically nosed this cub, encouraging it to keep moving. The larger cub didn't appear much better off. Though it moved more steadily than its sibling, its movements were slow and clumsy. These cubs should have been safely denning with their mother, not fighting for survival in the worst storm of the century. Sarah's thoughts raced as she observed their desperate condition. Her years of experience with local wildlife told her this was highly unusual behavior. Bears didn't approach human homes without reason, especially not with cubs in tow. Something must have gone terribly wrong to drive them here. The mother bear paused near Sarah's detached garage, her powerful head turning to study the building. Sarah held her breath as she watched the bear edge closer to the garage door. She suddenly remembered she hadn't fully closed it after storing her snow shovel earlier that day. A gap of about 8 inches remained at the bottom, an oversight that now seemed very significant. The security light caught the glint of ice crystals in the bear's fur, and Sarah could almost feel their desperation. The temperature display on her weather station showed 28 degrees below zero, with the wind chill making it feel even colder. Without shelter, those cubs wouldn't survive the night. Sarah knew she faced a crucial decision. Her mind filled with everything she knew about black bears, everything she had learned in her years of living alongside wildlife. She thought about the warnings from local rangers, the common sense rules of mountain living, and the potential dangers. But as she watched the smaller cubs stumble and struggle to rise, something deeper than logic pulled at her heart. Sarah's mind raced with memories of every bear encounter she had experienced over her 30 years in Montana. She remembered the young black bear that visited her apple trees each fall, always keeping a respectful distance. She thought of the mother bear she once photographed teaching her cubs to forage for berries, their natural wariness of humans evident in how quickly they disappeared into the forest at her presence. But this situation was entirely different. Through the frost-edged window, Sarah watched as the mother bear investigated the gap under her garage door. The wind howled louder now, driving sheets of snow sideways across her yard. Her weather station beeped with another alert, 32 degrees below zero. The storm was still intensifying. Sarah knew the basic rules of living in bear country by heart. Never feed them, never shelter them, never let them associate human structures with safety. These rules protected both humans and bears, keeping the natural order that had worked for generations. Breaking these rules not only risked her safety, but could lead to the bears being labeled as problem animals. The smaller cub collapsed in the snow. His mother immediately turned back, gently nudging it with her nose. The cub struggled to its feet, but Sarah could see its movements growing weaker. The second cub pressed against its sibling, offering support, but both young bears were clearly at their limit. Sarah's hands trembled as she set down her tea mug. The forecast predicted the storm would last until morning, with temperatures continuing to drop through the night. Her mind filled with images of what she might find in her yard tomorrow if she did nothing. The thought made her chest tight with emotion. Moving to her mudroom, Sarah pulled out her old wildlife journal. Over the years, she had documented every significant animal encounter, creating a detailed record of local wildlife behavior. She had never recorded a bear sighting in winter. Their natural instinct was to hibernate through these brutal months. Something catastrophic must have driven this family from their den. A particularly fierce gust of wind rattled her windows, and Sarah glanced at her phone. No service. The storm had knocked out cell reception, and her landline had gone dead hours ago. Even if she wanted to call for help, she couldn't. Whatever decision she made, she would have to live with the consequences alone. Sarah thought of Tom, her late husband. He had been a wildlife photographer, teaching her to read animal behavior and respect wildlife from a distance. What would he advise in this situation? She could almost hear his gentle voice reminding her that sometimes the rules of nature were more complex than human rules. The garage itself was mostly empty. Sarah had cleaned it out last fall, storing most items in her basement before winter hit. Some old blankets remained in the corner, and her garden tools hung on the wall. The space was sheltered from the wind and would stay considerably warmer than the outside air. It wasn't ideal, but it might be enough to keep the cubs alive through the night. Sarah watched the mother bear make another attempt to encourage her cubs forward. The larger cub managed a few steps, but the smaller one barely moved. Even the mother showed signs of extreme fatigue, her movements becoming less coordinated in the brutal cold. These bears hadn't chosen to be here. They weren't seeking easy food or making a nuisance of themselves. They were fighting for survival. The decision crystallized in Sarah's mind with surprising clarity. She knew the risks. She understood that she was about to break every standard rule of bear safety. But she also knew she couldn't watch these creatures die when she had the power to prevent it. Moving carefully, Sarah reached for her coat and boots. She had a plan forming, but it would require perfect timing and absolute calm. She would need to work with the mother bear's protective instincts rather than against them. One wrong move could spell disaster for everyone involved. The security light caught a final glimpse of the smaller cub as it collapsed again in the snow. This time, it didn't respond to its mother's nudging. Sarah took a deep breath and zipped up her coat. The time for deliberation was over. Whatever the consequences, she had chosen her path. Sarah moved with deliberate slowness as she implemented her plan. Her first step was to turn off the outdoor security light, allowing the bears to feel more secure in the darkness. Through her kitchen window, she could still make out their shapes thanks to the dim light spilling from her house. The wind had grown fierce enough to drown out most sounds, but Sarah knew she needed to work quickly. She gathered her supplies with trembling hands, a stack of old moving blankets, her warmest winter quilt, and a few gallons of water. The bears needed warmth more than food right now, and offering food would only create problems later. From her basement, Sarah retrieved Tom's old pulley system, something he had used to hoist heavy camera equipment. Working through the mudroom window, she carefully rigged the pulley to help her move the supplies into the garage without getting too close to the bears. Every movement had to be precise, calm, and non-threatening. The mother bear watched the garage intently now, her massive head swaying with exhaustion. The smaller cub remained motionless in the snow while its sibling pressed against it. Sarah's heart raced as she saw the cub's condition worsening. Using the pulley, she slowly lowered the first blanket through the small window into the garage, positioning it in the far corner away from the door. The storm reached a new level of intensity. Snow whipped through the air so thickly that Sarah could barely see the bears. The temperature dropped another 5 degrees, and ice formed on the inside of her mudroom window. She finished arranging the blankets and water, then retreated to her kitchen to watch and wait. Minutes passed like hours as the mother bear investigated the garage door. Sarah held her breath as the bear finally lowered her head and tested the gap with her nose. The bear's powerful shoulders easily widened the space enough for her to urge her cubs forward. The larger cub went first, crawling under the door. The mother bear then gently pushed the smaller cub, practically carrying it through the gap. Finally, she squeezed through herself. Sarah could no longer see the bears, but she heard the garage door rattle slightly as the mother bear adjusted it from the inside, her natural instinct to secure her den taking over. The bear's intelligence amazed Sarah. She had created only a small nest of blankets, but she could hear movement suggesting the mother bear was rearranging things to her liking. As the night progressed, Sarah maintained her vigil from the kitchen. She had positioned her favorite armchair by the window, wrapped in a thick blanket with a thermos of hot tea beside her. The storm raged outside, rattling windows and howling through trees. The weather report on her emergency radio announced that this was the worst winter storm in Montana's recorded history. Around midnight, Sarah's nearest neighbor, Bill Henderson, called on her emergency radio. The power had gone out across most of the valley, but Sarah's house still had electricity thanks to her generator. Bill asked if she was safe, mentioning that he had seen strange shadows in her yard earlier. Sarah kept her voice steady as she assured him everything was fine, deciding to wait until morning to explain the situation. The hours crept by. Sarah dozed occasionally but never fully slept, too aware of her unusual guests. She wondered if any other bears were out in the storm, hoping they had found better shelter than her temporary visitors had. The mother bear's decision to seek help from humans must have been her last resort, driven by the most powerful force in nature, a mother's need to protect her children. Near dawn, the storm began to ease slightly. The wind dropped from a scream to a moan, and the snow fell more gently. Sarah's thermometer still showed a dangerous 40 degrees below zero, but at least the worst of the storm had passed. She hadn't heard any sounds from the garage for several hours, which she hoped meant the bear family had managed to sleep. As the sky began to lighten, Sarah saw movement in her yard. Her heart sank as she recognized Bill's truck making its way slowly down her driveway, followed by another vehicle she didn't recognize. Word must have spread about something unusual at her property. She knew the time had come to face her community and explain her decision. Sarah straightened her shoulders, remembering the collapsed cub in the snow. Whatever judgment she faced, she knew she would make the same choice again. The first light of dawn revealed a transformed landscape. Snow had drifted against Sarah's house in smooth white waves, and icicles longer than her arm hung from every edge. The storm had turned her familiar yard into something from a winter fairy tale. But Sarah had little time to admire the view as more vehicles slowly made their way down her driveway. Bill Henderson reached her door first, concern etched on his weathered face. Behind him came Jack Turner, the local veterinarian, and Mary Whitehawk from the Tribal Wildlife Office. Sarah invited them into her warm kitchen, where she finally shared the full story of her night's vigil. As she spoke, she kept glancing anxiously toward her garage. Mary was the first to respond, her voice quiet but firm. She explained that several bear dens had been reported damaged or destroyed by the unprecedented storm. The Tribal Wildlife Office had been worried about bear families forced out into the cold, but the road closures had prevented any rescue attempts. Sarah's garage might have saved the only survivors. The group moved to Sarah's kitchen window to observe the garage. No sound or movement came from within, but the early morning light showed fresh snow disturbed around the door. The mother bear had clearly been active at some point, probably checking their safety through the night. Jack Turner offered to sedate the bears if necessary, but Mary suggested waiting. The bears had found safe shelter, and forcing them to move now might do more harm than good. The temperature was still dangerously low, and the cubs needed time to recover their strength. As the morning progressed, more people arrived. News traveled fast in their small community, and everyone had an opinion about the bears in Sarah's garage. Some brought supplies, extra blankets, materials to repair any damage the bears might cause, even offers to help rebuild the garage if needed. Others brought food for the growing group of people gathering in Sarah's kitchen. Around mid-morning, a state wildlife services truck managed to reach the property. Two officials emerged, looking stern until Mary updated them on the situation. Their attitudes shifted as they learned more details, especially about the condition of the cubs when Sarah first spotted them. One official, upon checking state records, confirmed this was the worst winter storm in Montana's recorded history. Sarah's phone service returned just as local news vans began appearing at the end of her driveway. The story of a woman sheltering bears during the historic storm had caught media attention, but the community formed a protective barrier around Sarah and her unusual guests. Bill politely but firmly kept reporters at a distance, while Mary handled official statements about wildlife protection during extreme weather events. Just past noon, a soft scratching sound came from the garage. Everyone in Sarah's kitchen fell silent. Through the window, they watched as the garage door lifted slightly and the mother bear's nose appeared. She emerged cautiously, her powerful body showing no signs of the previous night's exhaustion. The cold had diminished enough for her to begin testing the environment. Behind her came the cubs, and Sarah's heart lifted at their transformation. Both young bears moved with renewed energy, their fur no longer coated in ice. The smaller cub, which had seemed so close to death the night before, stood steadily on its feet. The bear family had survived the worst of the storm. The mother bear led her cubs in a careful inspection of the yard. The gathered people watched in respectful silence as she chose a path through the deep snow, her cubs close behind her. She showed no aggression, only a calm awareness of her surroundings. Years of experience with humans before this crisis had taught her which ones could be trusted. Mary quietly explained to the group that this behavior suggested the bear family had previous positive encounters with humans, though always at a safe distance. The mother bear's decision to seek help, while unusual, showed remarkable adaptation to extreme circumstances. It also highlighted the increasing impact of climate change on wildlife, as winter storms became more severe and unpredictable. To everyone's surprise, Sarah recognized a white patch on the smaller cub's chest. This was the same bear family she and Tom had photographed 3 years ago, when the mother was still a young bear learning to forage. The album of wildlife photos in Sarah's living room confirmed it. This revelation strengthened the community's investment in the bear's survival. As the day warmed slightly, Wildlife Services set up monitoring equipment to track the bear's recovery. The mother bear seemed content to let her cubs rest and regain their strength near the garage, which still offered shelter if needed. She understood they weren't ready for a long journey yet. Local support continued to grow as the story spread. The Tribal Council announced plans to create emergency wildlife shelters throughout the region. Sarah's neighbors organized a schedule to keep media at a respectful distance while the bears recovered. Even those who initially worried about attracting bears to the area came to understand this had been an exceptional circumstance that required an exceptional response. In the weeks following the historic storm, Sarah's simple act of compassion sparked changes that spread far beyond her small Montana community. Her garage, which had served as an emergency shelter for the bear family, became a symbol of how humans and wildlife could coexist when both faced extraordinary circumstances. The mother bear and her cubs stayed near Sarah's property for 3 more days, gradually regaining their strength. Wildlife experts monitored their recovery while keeping a respectful distance. The bear's presence transformed the community's understanding of wildlife behavior. People who had always seen bears as threats now witnessed their intelligence and family bonds firsthand. Sarah found herself with an unexpected new role in the community. Her detailed wildlife journals, kept over 30 years, proved valuable to researchers studying animal behavior during extreme weather events. The careful observations she and Tom had made of local wildlife provided insights into changing patterns that no one else had documented. Mary Whitehawk worked with tribal leaders and state wildlife services to develop new protocols for similar emergencies. They identified locations for emergency wildlife shelters throughout the region, designed to provide temporary sanctuary during dangerous weather conditions. Sarah's garage became the model for these shelters, with improvements based on what they had learned. Local schools invited Sarah to share her experience, teaching children about wildlife preservation and responsible human intervention. She brought Tom's old wildlife photographs, sharing stories of bears they had observed over the years. The mother bear's white-patched cub became a favorite character in these presentations, representing hope and survival against overwhelming odds. The community's attitude toward local wildlife shifted significantly. Residents began installing wildlife cameras to document animal behavior rather than just for security. They created a notification system to track bear movements and protect both humans and animals. Even those who had initially criticized Sarah's decision now participated in wildlife protection efforts. On the morning of the bear's departure, a small group gathered at Sarah's house. The mother bear led her cubs toward the forest with confident steps, all signs of their earlier distress gone. The smaller cub, now strong and energetic, looked back once at the garage before following its mother into the trees. Sarah felt tears in her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sadness. The story attracted attention from wildlife researchers across the country. They studied how extreme weather events forced animals to adapt their behavior and how human communities could safely provide emergency assistance. Sarah's experience became a case study in wildlife management courses, teaching future generations about the balance between human safety and animal welfare. Spring arrived early that year. As the snow melted, revealing the first green shoots, the community came together to implement their new wildlife protection plans. They created designated wildlife corridors through developed areas, ensuring animals had safe paths to travel. Local builders incorporated wildlife-friendly features into new constructions, learning from the natural shelters animals sought during the storm. Sarah's garage underwent its own transformation. While maintaining its original purpose, Subtle modifications made it a potential emergency shelter if ever needed again. A separate entrance was added, designed specifically for wildlife use during severe weather. The upgrades became a model for similar structures throughout the region. The mother bear and her cubs were spotted occasionally during the warmer months, always keeping a safe distance but showing no fear. Their story inspired changes in local regulations, with new guidelines for helping wildlife during extreme weather events. The community learned to balance respect for wild animals with compassion for their survival. Sarah found peace in these changes. Her late husband, Tom, would have been proud of how their years of wildlife observation had helped create better understanding between humans and animals. The photographs they had taken together now hung in the local Wildlife Education Center, teaching visitors about the intelligence and resilience of wild creatures. As another winter approached, the community felt better prepared for whatever challenges nature might bring. Emergency protocols were in place, and people understood their role in protecting local wildlife. Sarah often sat by her kitchen window, watching the forest edge where she had first spotted the desperate bear family. The experience had taught them all that sometimes the deepest connections come from reaching across boundaries to help others survive. The story of the freezing bear and her cubs became part of local legend, but its impact remained very real. It showed how a single act of compassion could transform an entire community's relationship with the wild world around them. In helping the bears survive their darkest night, Sarah had helped her community discover its own capacity for understanding and protection of the creatures who shared their mountain home. Want more heartwarming stories of incredible wildlife encounters and human compassion? Subscribe to our channel for weekly updates on amazing animal stories that will touch your heart. Click the bell icon to never miss a new story and join our growing community of wildlife enthusiasts. Together, we can make a difference in protecting our precious wildlife.